Hi everyone, welcome to our channel. I'm Chenge and this is my beautiful wife Pai. Today we have a special story to share about the birth of our son, Kai.
Kai's birth was far from what we expected. From labor and induction complications to his NICU admission and to a sudden postpartum preeclampsia diagnosis. Through it all, we saw God's hand and we felt compelled to share our story as a testimony of faith and resilience. And we also wanted to raise awareness on the importance of detecting postpartum preeclampsia early.
So, let's get into it. I'll take you right back to the beginning. We were at 41 weeks pregnant, almost a full week over our estimated due date, and our boy was chilling. No sign of coming out.
Nothing
at all.
Yeah.
Pai had been struggling with back pain for that whole time, and finally we got the call from the hospital to come in for
An induction.
I'll be real, for me, that's the point that stuff got real, right? As a first-time dad, that was it for me. But I remember thinking to myself, yeah, by midnight tonight, we'll be parents. Spoiler alert, it didn't play out like that. We got to the hospital on a Sunday afternoon, just before about 1 o'clock. And that's where the first blow hit. Here I am, caring husband, ready to go in with my wife and support her. We get to the door and they tell us, it's COVID time, so we can only admit your wife. You'll have to go to the waiting section. Guys! But anyway, my wife went in. I went over there.
When I walked in, I was given 2 induction options. The first one was Cervadil, which is a vaginal insert that has medication that helps soften the cervix so that it can start opening. Or I could get the balloon known as the Foley valve.
The mechanical one.
Yeah, so this one is like a thin silicone tube that has a balloon at the end. So they'll insert it into your cervix and then they will fill up the balloon to mechanically open your cervix. Obviously, from the 2 options, I chose the Cervadil. It just sounded less intimidating. So around 3 p.m., they administered the Cervadil. And the nurse asked me to take an hour walk just to get things going and to jumpstart the whole induction. But after this hour, she did tell me that we're okay to go back home because induction takes a while. So I went to the waiting room, reunited with Chenge, and we started pacing around the hospital, guys. Like, if you had seen us, you would have thought we're training for some marathon. Like, new dead energy is real. The guy was taking things too serious. Like, we need to walk, we can't sit. She said an hour.
The doctor or the nurse said walk, right? So we had to, make sure.
So fast forward an hour later, I go back in and they check. And then there's like a moment of silence where the nurse is looking at Kai's like heart rate and whatnot. And then all of a sudden she says, you guys are going to have to stay in the hospital because we've noticed that his heart rate is dipping and we're a little bit concerned. So we have to monitor. Yeah. And that's when reality hits. And in that very moment, they then allowed Chenge to come join me inside the room. So the nurse explained to us that for those who don't know, Cervadil works over a 24-hour period. So they were going to come check on us after 12 hours to see where I was with the dilation. So 12 hours passed and the nurse came and checked. And guys, despite the cramping that I was feeling, 12 hours later, I was at 0. Nothing had changed. So the nurse told us, you know what, we're just going to have to let it run the next 12 hours and see if it's going to work at the end of it.
As Pai said, those 12 hours are very uncomfortable hours with back pain, with Braxton Hicks, with all those different things that are going on. So as a husband, you just feel helpless. So you're thinking to yourself, how can I help my wife? Whether it's back rubs, foot rubs, you name it. Nothing seems to be working at this point. But in any case, another 12 hours go by and the doctor comes back again. 0 centimeters dilation.
This boy didn't want to come out. He didn't want to come out.
Was chilling.
So officially that was a failed induction.
100%. So they had to move into the next stage. So the doctors took a little bit of time to go and determine what the next course of action they would take was.
So after some time, 2 doctors walked into the room and they were holding metal apparatus. I remember looking at them thinking, what is about to happen? Because the apparatus just looked intimidating. And that's when they explained they were going to have to do the balloon method since the first one failed. And in that moment, reality hits that I'm going to go through 2 inductions. But anyway, fast forward, they do what they have to do. And now I had to wait for a few hours to see if my body was going to respond to this second induction.
So at this point, we'd already been at the hospital for probably going on 30 hours when they were starting the second induction. So you can imagine, Pai has been going through it. And when your wife is going through it, husbands, you know, you're going through it too. But after 11 hours, it worked. Or at least kind of worked. She was 3 centimeters dilated. At which point, the doctor broke her water. It was nothing like the movies.
I just remember thinking, like, when the water came out, the temperature was just the perfect temperature, warm, and I was just like, wow, this is where he has been chilling this whole time. Like, it was...
And there was even a sound. You could literally hear them.
So the waters now broke, and then came oxytocin to jumpstart contractions. Oxytocin is just one of the worst things I can imagine. Like, that thing ramps up contractions to a certain level that I was begging for an epidural. And the epidural itself, it's a whole adventure on itself. Imagine, like, you're going through the worst pain of your life, and then the doctor comes and tells you, you need to be still or else you might risk paralysis. Like, I remember thinking to myself, how am I supposed to contain this pain? Like, I can barely do anything, but I have to hold still.
At least it worked, right? So the first hour after the epidural, she was back to her old self again. She was happy. She had a little bit more mobility. It had just numbed her back completely, which was the source of most of her pain.
I was in heaven. All the pain went away with the epidural. So now we have to wait a couple of more hours because now I'm at 3 centimeters. I have to get to 10 centimeters to start pushing. So in between, I felt like using the bathroom. So I go to the bathroom and I just couldn't pee. But I felt pressed. I was so confused. So I called the nurse and then immediately she knew what was happening. She's like, I need to bring a catheter. I'm like, catheter what?
Imagine.
Guys. So when the catheter comes, inserting that catheter, my lord. Oh, but the moment they put the catheter, everything came out. But I felt such a huge relief. So now, in between getting to 10 centimeters, each time the nurse came to check how much I had dilated, they had to take the catheter out. And once they were done, they had to put back the catheter. So
it was rough.
I went through it. I don't know how many times they checked, took it off, put it back. That was just intense for me.
Then about 4 hours after the epidural was administered, the contraction pain suddenly came back. Whatever I was trying to do to help just wasn't working. Back rubs, foot rubs, ice pack, hot pack, you name it. Nothing was happening. And Pai was in excruciating pain. So I had to call the nurse to come back in. And when they did come in, they thought maybe the epidural had stopped working. In which case they decided, okay, we're going to call back the anesthetician and they're going to up the dose of epidurals.
By the time I hit 10 centimeters, I couldn't feel my whole lower body. I was numb, but I could still feel the pain. So I don't know what was happening with my body at that time, but things were just not going the way they were supposed to go. And then all of a sudden, the nurses were like, it's time to push. I just remember thinking, I cannot even move my own leg. Like, they felt like cement. So they had to literally lift my leg and put it on those little leg posts in order to go into the breathing position. And this is when I realized that induction is not our friend, because usually when you're having contractions during natural labor, you have a gap in between where you can rest. So it's during those contractions that you can actually push the baby out, and then you can rest and then try to push again. But with oxytocin and the whole induction and everything, there's no formula when it comes to that moment. It's like contraction. Like it's like a continuous cycle, and then you get a random break. So that's what I was going through. And remember, my epidural at this point had just, even upping the dose, nothing was working. My body was just, I can't even describe it. So I start pushing 1 hour and 2 hours. Meanwhile, he's standing, the nurses are saying, go, you can do it, like we can see something or whatnot. And then 3 hours in, the doctor says, okay, you know what, she's tired, let's stop. The baby is not in the right position. The baby is not in the what? In my mind, I'm thinking, isn't this
After having pushed
3 hours, guys? 3 hours. They tell us, let's take a break. You regain some energy and then we'll come and try. Maybe the baby will be in the correct position by then. Going on this break was the worst decision when I look at it in hindsight, because the pain level during that break, because I was 10 centimeters dilated and the baby was sitting right, I can't describe. Like, it felt like I had a headache down there. Like, guys, at that point, I was crying. My body, I could not even stand up by myself. Remember, I was numb. I was just, you know what?
And guys, all you can do in this time is just continue to be reassuring, right? Hey, babe, you got this. Help her through. Give her some breathing exercises. Give her back rubs. But yeah, they really go through it. Shout out for all the moms out there.
At some point, I could not take it. I just was so done. I was in so much pain. I remember I grabbed Chengi's hands. I looked him dead in the eyes and I told him, I cannot do this anymore. I cannot push. And being the supportive husband that he was, he really tried to encourage me. No, babe, let's just try to push one more time before we go any other route. And I told him, I need a C-section and I need you to advocate it for me because I cannot do it, babe. My body was just, I can't even explain it, guys, but it was just everything. I was in pain. At that point, I don't know, when I told you in that manner, because I know you wanted to...
Yeah, well, you just feel helpless, right? You just feel helpless as a partner. But as soon as the doctors came back, the message had been received. I asked them. I really tried to advocate for that C-section. And they decided to try and push it off. At which point, we got a shift change, and one of the new doctors that came in was able to get the baby into the right position. So they reassured us,
this won't take more than 5 minutes. If it does take more than 5 minutes, then we'll take you to the C-section.
So with the renewed hope of pushing for just 5 more minutes, we got the show underway. Pai started pushing with all she had, and you could really see progress. She started to see hair, but the doctors were having a difficult time getting him out. So they had to go through a little procedure called an episiotomy. So they connected a pair of scissors and, guys, it was graphic, but I thank, my lucky stars that I've watched National Geographic all my life, because, man, some of these things, you can't be prepared for them, for real. So they started pulling him out and they grabbed his little head and they're twisting and they're pulling. And guys, as a first-time dad, you just feel like, what are they doing to our baby, right? Why are they, it just looks so violent and so rough. But, you have to hold yourself back and say, these are medical professionals. They know what they're doing. But in that moment, you just can't help but wonder, what is going on? But anyway, after what seemed like forever, I finally got out.
And that was the happiest moment of our lives. And in that moment of celebrating, we noticed that Kai didn't cry. And that actually kind of put a hold on everything. We were all looking concerned, what is happening? So immediately the doctors took him and he didn't even get to cut the umbilical cord. That's something that he was looking forward to. But because then the situation just turned into an emergency, they took him to the next room to go check and see what was happening. Meanwhile, I stayed to birth the placenta, and the whole time we just had our hearts in our hands. And a few minutes later, the nurse came back with Kai and he was crying. And that was the happiest sound we could hear in that room, guys. Kai crying it meant everything.
I think you'd be so happy to hear a babe cry, but yeah.
In that moment, it was everything. So here's our first picture as a family. You can tell that I was looking very wasted. Must have been all the medication I was getting. But anyway, they then allowed us to go into our, what is that room? Postpartum room. Yeah. So now we're in the postpartum room recovering, and we thought we're out of the woods. Everything was now okay. And the nurses have told us by then that we could go the next day. Everything was okay. But as Kai was sleeping, something was strange. His breathing was just off. It sounded labored. So it just was a new mom paranoia. Something in my gut was just screaming that something is not right. So immediately I called a nurse and I asked her to listen to his breathing. But this nurse listened and she told us that everything was okay. But then I still wasn't satisfied. Something just told me I am not comfortable taking this baby home the next day. So I asked her if she could call a second nurse just to double check. So another nurse came, she listened, and immediately she could tell that something was off. So they called a pediatrician to come and check on him. When the pediatrician came, she immediately got Kai admitted into NICU. So just a side note, new moms, if something is off, trust your gut. Advocate for your new baby. So at this point, they rushed Kai off to NICU and we were told to just hold on and they would tell us when we could come see him.
So after 3 hours of waiting, they finally let us go and see Kai in the NICU. So we walked downstairs to his room, and before we went in, the nurse warned us that he has a few tubes connected to him, but don't worry, they're just to help his breathing and for us to monitor his heart rate. With that little pep talk, we were able to go in, and guys, our hearts just sank, right? Just seeing him with those little tubes, right? Nothing prepares you for that. Those little tubes, but you know, he was sleeping peacefully. We could see on the screen his heartbeat was good, his breathing was fairly regular, and everything generally looked
Good.
all right.
Yeah. So at that moment, we were just happy that our little guy is there. He's getting all the help he needs. And, you know, he's in the best hands and God is with him above all. So Kai stayed in the NICU for a couple of days and I was up recovering in my postpartum ward. So any moment I would go and spend time with him. So my husband was also with us. And in the end, the nurse told us that his labored breathing was because one of his lungs was not receiving as much oxygen as it should be.
After 3 days of monitoring, Pai's recovery had been going well, so they discharged her. But Kai was still recovering in the NICU. So that was one of the hardest moments for us because they allowed us to go home, but we couldn't go home with our baby boy.
They also let us know in NICU that only one parent was allowed to sleep over. So immediately I took the first shift since I also had to be breastfeeding. So at this point, I hadn't been home in about a week from when the induction started. So I needed to go home, freshen up and grab some new clothes. But the whole time I was going through this, I had this headache that would not go away. So I took painkillers, but nothing happened. The headache kept getting worse. So I just dismissed it, thinking maybe I'm just too stressed, our child was in NICU, or maybe I was just too tired or had lack of sleep. So I didn't really take it serious, but I was hoping that it would go away. Fast forward a few hours later, I head back to the hospital to go spend time with Kai. And when I got there, I remember the nurse was like, "Oh, so you're the one with the baby today?" I'm like, "Yeah, you're gonna be with me throughout the night." But then an hour, 2 hours in, that headache was not going away. So I told Kai's nurse, "I'll be back in just a few minutes. I'm just gonna go to the emergency and just quickly see a doctor." So I go down to the emergency. I get there, they take my vitals. So they take out the blood pressure machine and then they hook it up to me. And you know, once it was done, ping, and the value came out, the nurse just looked at me dead in the eyes. And she told me, "I am happy that you came to emergency." So I asked her why. And she told me, "Your blood pressure is 170/90. And that is very high." Just from her facial expression, I could sense that this was really, really bad. I've never had high blood pressure or low blood pressure. And throughout my pregnancy, my blood pressure was normal. So hearing this was just a shock. And she told me, "We need to readmit you because you have postpartum preeclampsia." That was the first time I heard those words. And you know, Fast forward, I'm in my room, back in the hospital. I am bawling out, crying. And I called Chenge and I'm just hysterical. I'm telling him, look, I feel like I failed. I'm supposed to be with Kai and now they're telling me that I postpartum preeclampsia. And you know, your mind just races to the worst outcome. I felt like, okay, this is it for me. Like my body cannot take this.
It was a tough call. Yeah, she was so emotional and just going through so many things, and all I could do in that moment was just try to calm her down and try to ease her mind.
Just from this experience, like one of the things that I'll point out before we just finish off this story is when you give birth, if you sense that something is not right, even in as silly as it sounds, or if you want to try overthink it by saying you're stressed out or anything, just go back to the hospital and get checked. I honestly thank God for getting me to go back to emergency, because I had tried to reason it out, but if I had not gone back to emergency, I may not have been here to tell the story. So ladies, if something is wrong, if you feel something going amiss, just go and get it checked out.
So when I got back to NICU in the morning, a ray of good news. Kai's breathing had stabilized and they were happy enough to let him be discharged that day. So that presented a bit of a dilemma, because now Pai had been readmitted into hospital and they gave us some options. Either I could go home with Kai, and guys, I'll be honest, I was not ready. Or they could readmit Kai and we could all stay in the hospital together. So obviously, I chose the second option.
So for the next 5 days, we were all back in hospital in one room. They were monitoring my blood pressure and trying to bring it back down to normal. So in hindsight, the silver lining in that we all came back was Kai ended up getting extra care, because he was already good to go, but because he was with me in hospital, the nurses still came and checked on him. And at the same time, the nurses were teaching us how to bath the baby, how to feed him, with bottle feed him. They taught us so much.
It's some pretty amazing nurses, for sure.
For sure. They were really, really amazing. So by the time we were ready to leave, we had a wealth of knowledge that we had harvested from these nurses. Being first-time parents, that really, really helped us confidently take Kai home.
Once Pai's blood pressure was back on the mend, they finally released us for the second time. This time it was for real. It really felt like a second chance, like we were finally able to go home as a family. Those days were hard, but they taught us a lot of things. To trust our instincts, to lean on each other, and most importantly, to let God lead. Thanks for watching, everyone.
Stay blessed.